Janome.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Live with Janome, and welcome to the second episode or second session of the Janome Summertime Scale Builder giveaway. And if you guys aren't familiar with that, well, it is kind of new. We just started it last week, and it is a program that's 12 weeks long, and it allows us to share you guys with new techniques or some older techniques, just a great refresher of different skills that you guys may want a refresher on, or maybe be new to you guys. So, and it's also a contest, which is really exciting. And there's all of the details on our website, as well as we're gonna have a link on this video. So I won't take up a huge amount of time explaining all of it, but basically it's a 12-week program that will show you 12 different skills, and it gives you 12 different opportunities to enter 5 different prizes that are valued up to over $500 each. So you've got some really cool Janome stuff, as well as a service on one of your Janome machines at your local dealer, which is really great because I know I'm not the only one that doesn't get their machine serviced as often as we all should. So that's a great opportunity to show you guys some of our new skills. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So today's, or this week's program, we're going to be going over the blind hem stitch and the blind hem foot. So the blind hem is one of those techniques that I feel like people often forget, including myself, because if you don't use it on a regular basis, it's easy to kind of forget the process because it's a little bit different, it's a little bit weirder, but don't worry, we will go over all of that, and because there is a specific way to iron your fabric to create the hem, which we'll go over, and we're also going to go over the feet. So first thing we're going to go over is the foot that we use, which is the G foot. It has a little flange in the center with a little bump on it. I'm going to put it down here so maybe you can see that a little bit. So it's our G foot, has a little guide right here in the center, and we're using that guide to line up our the placement. So this helps us give perfect placement. So I'm also going to show you while we're zoomed in here an example of the blind hem. So the blind hem is basically, it mimics or creates a hem, but when you do it with matching thread, it virtually disappears. Obviously, I did do this in a contrasting thread to show you guys what it would look like, just so you can actually see. I did actually do 2 different examples. So let me show you this here. This is actually the default of it, and then I actually made some adjustments on the next one. So this is what it looks like on the front of your project. And then that's the stitch, what it looks like on your machine itself. You're going to see this decorative, this is what it's going to look like. So it has 4 straight stitches and then a little bite, and then 4 stitches and then a little bite, or that little V. So you're going to see this, you're going to be stitching it out like this, but you're actually, when it's done, you're going to see it like this. So this is set at that default. And then this is when I made a little bit more adjustments to make that bite a little bit smaller. So you can see here, so this bite is a little bit smaller than this bite. So let me put these right next to each other so you can kind of see that they are a little bit different. I know it's maybe a little bit hard to tell on the screen, but there is a little bit of a difference, and that gave me a little bit smaller of a bite than the original default one. And then I'm going to show you this one right here. This is one done with matching thread. So I did it with this pretty coral sort of color. So if you, the best results are always going to be given when you have matching thread. If you don't have an exacting matching thread, go a shade or 2 darker. It's always better to go darker than it is to go lighter. It's also important, at least in my opinion, to go with the same sheen of the fabric. So if you're working on, this is a quilting cotton, I'm going to be using either a cotton or a poly that has a matte finish to it, so it doesn't, that helps it blend in a little bit more than if I used, let's say, an embroidery thread that was really shiny. That would stick out a little bit more. But if I was doing a blind hem on, say, satin, then I maybe would want to use maybe an embroidery thread or a silk thread that had a higher sheen to it, that it would match that as well. So I'm going to flip this over so you can see it on the back side. So you can kind of see it, the stitch. I mean, it does match pretty well, so it's going to be fairly hidden. But there is a special way to fold your the fabric to create a blind hem. So let's go ahead and let's make sure this iron's on, and we're going to iron the fabric to get the proper placement, because it's super important to make sure that your fabric is ironed properly. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. Another thing that's really important when you're working with the blind hem, or really any foot, or anytime you're using your machine, you always want to make sure that you tighten the ankle of your machine with a screwdriver, because if you don't tighten it with a screwdriver, it will eventually loosen up as you sew. And I actually have a quick little story about that. I was doing some videos for Janome at the home office, and I was doing a video on the blind hem, and it just wasn't matching up, and it wasn't matching up, and I was going crazy. I thought I was losing my mind, because I was like, I know I'm doing this right. I know I'm doing this right. Why isn't this catching? What is going on? And it was because it hadn't been tightened with a screwdriver, and it was loose, so it wasn't lining up, and that the guide and the stitch wasn't matching properly. So it just kept missing, that bite kept missing it no matter how much I adjust it, because it just was slightly off because it hadn't been tightened with the screwdriver. So always tighten your the ankle with a screwdriver anytime you change it out. So that's just a little reminder, because that's something that I went through just a handful of weeks ago, and I seriously thought I was going crazy, because I was like, I don't understand why I'm doing this wrong. I swear I practice this and know what I'm doing, and at least I pretend to, and it just wasn't matching up. So always tighten that screwdriver. It will save you maybe a little bit of an insanity feeling for a moment, and it always will. And it also broke my needle, so it will also save you a needle too. So let's go ahead and hem our fabric. So this is my fabric that I'm working on, and we're just going to pretend this could be either a curtain or a skirt, or could be whatever I want to hem. And you want to hem it so it's a double fold. You want to make sure your raw edge is encased within your hem. I also like to use a hem pressing. It's a this is a Clover hot press, and it's a heat resistant fabric, or kind of fiber, and it has markings, and it helps line up your hems, so it makes it nice and consistent. So it's a little bit easier, I find, than a seam guide. So what I'm going to do is I could either do a 1/2 inch or a full inch, but I'm going to do a full inch hem. So what I do is all I have to do is fold my fabric back to line up where it matches with whatever measurement that I want to use on my press, either on my hot press. And then so I match it up, the raw edge here. So this is my raw edge of my fabric lined up to my inch mark. And then I'm going to I'm pushing the actual material, the fabric, the utensil here, the notion, into that fold, just to make sure it's nice and snug. And then I'm going to press this down, and this will give me a perfect hem without having to make markings or anything. And then I can just slide this down to finish the last bit, and I can make any adjustments, line up that raw edge to my marking, and then kind of push up against it to make sure it's nice and snug, and then give it a good press. And then, since I'm just going to do another inch here, I can just fold this so that I'm folding on the raw edge with where's going to be the outmost part of my hem. So I can just use the previous fold to make my next fold. I could also do this where it was a 1/2 inch at the beginning and then a full inch at the end. I can make my hem whatever measurement that I want it to be. I'm just using that inch as an example. And then give it a good press. I am also a big fan of, when I'm doing hems, I like to use some sort of spray starch, so I would maybe give this a little bit of a spray, and that will help secure this a little bit. So now I have my hem just like I do normal. This is just like any sort of normal hem. There's nothing special so far. But this next step is where it gets a little confusing, or it can get confusing. This is where it can get a little backwards. So we're going to have, this is the top part of the garment or the top part of the project, and then this is our hem. And we want to fold this backwards like this, where I have about a scant 1/4 inch showing all the way across. And this, you want this to be nice and even. And you don't want to press this because you don't want to create a crease in your project. So I just pin it. And you want to do, I like to do like around a scant 1/4 inch or 1/4 inch. You don't want to do anything much bigger than that or much smaller, and because if you do it much smaller, you're not going to have anything to grab onto. So it looks like that. So that would be, and you're going to sew it this way. So you're actually sewing onto the hem and just biting into the actual project. So I'm going to pull one of these as an example over here. So it's actually going to be like that. This is where it was folded back and I had that little bite. So my stitching is going to be actually on the hem itself, and it's just going to grab or bite, do that little V into the actual project. So then when you fold it back, you get those little V's create those little dashes, and that's what keeps the hem secure. So, and that's what you can make these adjustments to make this bite either bigger or smaller depending on how much of a bite that you want to use or you want your project to have. And another thing that you always want to do is, I'm always a big fan of testing out any of your projects before you actually sew it on your real project. So I always recommend testing it on the same type of fabric that you're going to be working on. So like your actual project, if it's quilting cotton, test on the same type of quilting cotton. Or if it's on a denim, test on a denim. Don't necessarily, because any of those adjustments that you make may not work with the project that you're working on if you're testing it on a different fabric. So that's just sort of something that is beneficial for any time you're doing tests. But so I'm going to show this to you one more time, just because I know it can be a little, can feel a little backwards. So I'm just going to unpin this for just 1 second. So again, we have just our normal hem, and then we fold it back upon itself where we're seeing the hem exposed about a 1/4 inch to a scant 1/4 inch. And then that's when you pin it in place. So I'm just going to quickly pin this, and then we're going to stitch it out. And I'm going to show you where to find your particular stitch depending on which machine you have. So that now it's all ready to sew. And again, I don't want to necessarily press this because I could create a seam or create a indentation or a mark on the wrong side of the fabric or on the right side of the fabric, and you don't want to see that. You don't want to see a mark that's not going to disappear. Sometimes it can be hard to get those marks away. So I'm going to just fold this back, not pressing it, a good scant 1/4 inch to a 1/4 inch. And then, oh wait, before we move over, I do want to show you one more kind of trick or tip on hemming. Because a lot of times if you're hemming with the blind hem, it very easily could be done on a skirt which has a curve. And as you know, when we're working with a woven, it's always easier to fold on grain because that's the weave structure. It's the way it works. It's going to fold better on a grain than it is on bias. It can kind of pucker a little bit on bias. So I'm going to show you how I like to iron when I'm working on bias. So this, we're going to pretend that this is my skirt. And I don't know if any of you guys have had this issue when you're hemming a skirt. It can kind of pucker a little bit, and it sometimes doesn't, especially when your hem gets larger. This doesn't always lay the flattest, and you can sometimes get those like little puckers that sometimes happen when you're on a curve. I'm going to show you what I like to do to help prevent that. So what I like to do is I like to stitch a basting stitch, so like a 5.0 large stitch along the edge of my project. Now this is an extra step, so it does take a little bit longer, but I think it always looks nicer in the end. So you can also do this with a thread that is washable. I sometimes will use like a bobbin where my bobbin's washable, and then the top thread is just a regular thread. And that way when it washes, that stitch will come out so you don't have to worry about it being in there. It's not a big deal if it is in there, but that's a good way you can use those water soluble threads that you've seen before, is to create, either put it on the top thread or in the bobbin. You could do it in both top and the bobbin too, if you wanted to. So what I like to do is I create that about 1/4 of an inch all the way around the project. And then when I fold, it's going to fold where that stitch line is. So I don't have to, because it can be a little bit harder to use the guide when it's on a curve, because the curve's not going to match perfectly. So I like to do this top stitching method with a basting stitch, and then I fold it down where that edge is, or where that stitch is. And then what you can do is, if it starts puckering at all, you can just use the basting stitch to draw that stitch in. So you could pull that in a little bit if you needed to. So it will lay nice and flat here. So you could do that where it would pull that in and ease that in. It's basically like an ease stitch on a hem. So now in this way, it's nice and perfect that stitch is this hem is going to be really straight and even, because I have that stitch line as a guide. So now when I fold it again, I could pull. I like to actually use pins to keep my, when I'm hemming, to keep it in place. So now when you hem it down, it just kind of folds in place a lot easier. And then if you can see how it starts like puckering a little bit, that's when you can take that top stitch, because you've got it here on that edge on the hem here, and pull it to kind of ease that in if I needed to. So you can see how that kind of pulled that a little bit tighter where it's keeping it. And then once you press it down, it will stay nice and flat. So again, I can just kind of push this around. And this is extra helpful when you have kind of like super slippery fabric, to have something to kind of hold on to. So this is where, see how it's starting to kind of get a little funky here? That's when I could pull. See how I just pulled that and kind of hugged it in a little bit? See how that just kind of is laying a lot nicer, because I'm pulling that thread, and that kind of makes it nice and snug. So you can see how nice that is. And again, I would use some spray starch here because I'm a big fan of spray starch. So now you have a beautiful hem on a curve that is so much easier. There's less puckers. It is that little bit of an extra step, but I find it takes that, makes it look a lot nicer as a finished project. And then again, if this was my hem, I would then go back and fold it this way. I'd need a little bit more of a fabric to make the blind hem here. And I would go all the way around and pin. And then I'd be stitching on this part right there. And then it would fold back, and then you'd see just those little dashes. All right, so now I'm going to go to the machine and show it to you stitched out. So first let's select our stitch, and I'm also going to attach my foot. So I'm going to show you on my M7, but you can use this you can do this stitch it's on almost all of our machines. Not on any of our straight stitch, so not the HD9 or the 1600P, but any machine that can do a zigzag, it's most likely going to have this stitch. Even some of our more travel or entry-level machines, a lot of them have this blind hem stitch. So chances are your machine probably has it. So there's a couple ways I can find this. So on this particular machine, I can find it through the sewing applications, which I'll show you here, which is my t-shirt icon. And then it has, let's see, where's blind hem? Blind hem is right here on the second row right there. And it also shows me what foot I want to use, which is the G foot right there. It also is going to ask me if I'm doing it on a woven or a stretch. I'm doing it on a woven, so I'm going to show you on the woven fabric. And then also, if you have the MC17, you also can use your AccuSpark app on your phone and take a picture of the barcode or the QR code, and it will also show you a diagram of the how to fold your fabric too if you forget. And also on the MC17, our new top of line, it also can do that. So also if you forget, you always have that great little reference, as well as if you don't have the M7, you still can download the AccuSpark app and find that stitch and still look at it that way if you needed a reminder. And it will show you what foot, what stitch to use. So you also, if you don't have a sewing applications in your machine, you just need to look for this stitch, whether it be, it's that 4 stitches with a little bite. And then if you're doing it on a woven, if you're doing it on a stretch, you're going to want the ones that have one big bite and then there are 2 separate smaller little V's, kind of like a zigzag. Basically, it needs that ability to stretch that hem. So that's why they're not straight stitches and they're like little tiny zigzags. Let's go back to our woven, and I'm going to just stitch it out at the default, and then we can see if we need to make any adjustments. So I'm going to place my fabric under my foot. I'm going to remove my pin, and then I'm attaching it so that the flange here, that guide, see this little black guide there, is going to nest right along this fold line so that it gives me perfect, going to line up perfectly. So again, this flange needs to be basically in this ditch in a sense, where again, this is the top of my fabric or my garment, and then this is the hem itself. And then I'm going to just start sewing. And I'm going to actually slow this down a little bit so you can see where it will stitch 4 stitches on the hem itself and then bite onto the garment. And then remove your pin. I got it a little bit off because I'm sewing at a weird little angle here, but all right, I'm going to stop here and I'm going to cut my threads. And then as you can see, so this actually, I got a little wonky here. So, but you can see here, this is where it just kind of grabs a little bit onto the top part. And then when I unfold it, you'll see the little bites. And that's where I missed it because I sewed a little crooked there. Now, if I want to make some adjustments, let's just go back to the machine. I'm going to take this pin out as well, place it back into its right spot. Again, making sure that that flange or the ditch is right or is lined up in the ditch there. And the stitch itself is being sewn onto the hem. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my adjustment on my screen. I'm going to shrink that down to maybe 3. Let's see what 3 looks like. It was originally on 6, and that is my needle position or my stitch width. So I could either on my my M7, I can adjust it with this dial here, or I can also adjust it with the screen itself. I'm going to go back down one more. We can test this out and see if that looks good. And we're going to stop here and then cut our threads and check that, see if we like that a little bit better. So this is the new section. See, that's a lot straighter now. You can see how it just barely bites that top, so that when I flip this back, you can see how that's tinier. So this is the bigger bites, and that's the tinier bites. You can see how that would, once that was done in blue thread, you'd barely be able to see that. And I could, if I wanted, I could even test to see maybe I could try to make that adjustment, and if I needed it a little bit nearer, a little bit wider, I could do that. You do still want it to bite some. You need probably like a thread or 2 for it to grab onto, because you don't want it to be too small. where it doesn't actually attach it at all. So you do need it to actually do some biting, but just maybe not too much. So you could make any sort of adjustments that you wanted to. You could also increase your stitch length. So if you wanted them to be spaced out a little bit more, so we could see what that looks like. Let's do one more little stitch here, and I'm going to shrink it down one more by the width, and then I've also increased it. I've increased my stitch length, so I have so there'll be a greater distance in between each little bite, and we can see what that looks like. And then I'm at the end, so I'm going to cut my threads. So this is it here. So you can see how this is tighter. So each of these bites are closer together than each of these bites. So let's flip this back. So you can see that shows up even less than this. And I think that looks beautiful, especially once I give this a press. You're not going to see that fold there. And it will really kind of blend in. I mean, even with this neon pink thread, it's still pretty subtle. I mean, obviously it's still there, but it's really barely even noticeable. Even if you had that, you really wouldn't be able to notice it too much, but do that with that matching blue thread. And I would do it towards this darker blue thread and not the lighter, because again, remember, it's always better to do it with a shade or two darker than lighter, because it will just blend in a little bit better and also match the sheens, and it's just going to really disappear on the bottom of your hem, whether or not that be your curtain or the bottom of a skirt or dress pants. I think it's a really beautiful way of finishing a garment or a project that really disappears and just makes it really look nice and professional without having to spend the time to do a blind hem by hand. It's just super easy with your machine, with your G-foot and whichever Janome machine you have. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video on learning how to do a blind hem, and stay tuned for next week for the third part of, and I believe Mitzi's doing it, so stay tuned for Mitzi next Wednesday at 3 o'clock to see the next session of the Summertime Skill Builder. So hope you guys have a great day and happy sewing. Again, my name's Miriam Coffey. All right, see you guys later. Bye-bye.